All right, guys, welcome back to the Performance Playbook. Today, I have the one and only Hayden Mitchell. Hayden, welcome to the podcast.
Nice to be here.
It's nice to have you. So I recently found you on Instagram. Funny enough, I'm actually trying to lower my consumption on Instagram, but starting this podcast, I feel like it's been actually very useful to up my consumption of Instagram.
Yeah.
But I've been finding, I feel like in the deep corners of the internet, you start to find people that think differently or think more openly. And I think that's why I liked your content a lot more, was it's not rigid. And I feel like you've posted a couple times recently to where you were explaining, you connected like Ido Portal, people that like to learn and look at the philosophies of movement practices, and they aren't so rigid to where they live in this little box. And I've said this a million times. I was kind of like talking about like the CSCS, which we were just talking about before we started here, is, like the CSCS, for example, like you learn within this little box, and it's not a bad box to start in, but it's a small box, and it's not really where you actually learn a lot of things to apply to the people that you work with. But the deeper you've gotten into your studies, and because you're working on your PhD, correct?
Yeah.
So it's like the deeper you've gone into a lot of your work, what like ideas and like mantras have changed for you when it comes to training, strength training specifically?
Oh, big question. Um,
Starting off hot.
yeah, I mean, when you think about just kind of the evolution of a coach, right? Looking at myself, but I mean, everybody I have a tremendous amount of respect for has probably all followed a similar path in some ways. Um, yeah, you start off, you got to have those tight boxes. It's got to be tightly wound so you can understand your place, and you're always arrogant as well. You think you know because you are in that tight box. And as a young coach, I think all of us talk too much. We talk far too much. I was a soccer coach for 20 years, and the beauty of soccer is, what it did for me is I taught in inner cities. You may not know that about me, and I taught a ton of different refugees and immigrants, and like 27 different nations within like 3 years at one particular program. And what it teaches you is to shut your mouth and observe a lot, because stylistically within that game is creativity. So if you're coming from Tanzania or Iraq or Mexico, you have a different style. And so for me, I didn't learn to be quiet until afterwards, and to be more of an observer. My dad made me an observer of movement early on. He'd ask me to look at people's like ankles and their gait pattern. Do you think they're an athlete? Do you think they're quick? Do you think they're powerful? How would they express strength, kind of thing? But yeah, the evolution for me was, especially even in the last 3 years, was I taught at the University of Alabama as a graduate teaching assistant. I always kind of did it my way in a sense, or it's improvisational. I came in with 3 to 4 basic ideas or principles, and I let the students sort of decide where we're going to go. When you teach in inner cities, you have a plan, and that plan gets destroyed. It can be the same way with college kids as well. And over time, like I dove as deep as I could into sports science specifically, and it left me cold. I'm not going to say it's not beautiful in its own way. But I say, like, read the science, but you got to be the science. You have to explore. There's so many different ways to pursue a performance pathway, right?
Yeah.
And it sort of left me like selfish in a sense, where I was just looking at data, I was looking at metrics, and I lost like my way of communicating with self and with my clients, my athletes, my students. Everyone's a student to me. And it honestly, it just like burned me out. I forgot why I got into this game, which was through play.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing is all play. You know, I mean, from playing basketball in Little Tykes Cole as a kid to now. And I return back to that nostalgia when I'm down in life, right? And I'm depressed. Basketball's coming out, right? And it's just this rhythm, coordination, and timing, and those unknown qualities that I'm searching for, man.
Yeah.
You know, how do you find somebody's unknown qualities? You better be connected.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah.
All of this knowledge can't feed that soul.
Yeah, I feel like you, a lot of your posts recently and some of the ones that I've kind of went back through, you do talk about play. And even for our warm-ups, right, we talk about the CSCS, and they're like, you have to follow the ramp protocol. And I feel like,
Yeah, we can go ahead and like nix that part of the CSCS. See, yeah, it's like even with like plyometrics, like, and I'm not going to call certain people out. There's like some major players in plyos. You're like, yeah, that also looks like pickup basketball. It's the same thing. Everything you just like rigidly approach. Like, do you have 10 kids? Do you have 6 kids? Did you have 4? Did you hand them a basketball instead? Because all of that is the same thing.
yeah,
You know?
yeah,
It
yeah,
drives you nuts, you know. It's like, we need to work on footwork. It's like, give them a soccer ball. If they're football players, give them a soccer ball.
yeah,
Let them go. Yeah.
yeah. Well, so it's like, you know, you're within the CSCS, they unknowingly are just relearning about play. And so like the things that you talk about, how you move, it's sometimes like for us to progress, we need to regress. And so I feel like you've maybe just found that beauty yourself by going like, my warm up is just me playing around and getting warm. I have like kind of a funny example here is when I sometimes get ready for practice, for diving practice, right? Where you need to be pretty hypermobile and explosive. I shit you not, the best warm up for me is wrestling one of my teammates.
I love it.
You get so warm. Nothing, and it blows me away because I was trying to replicate some form of movement patterns to get me as, you know, like activated as that. And nothing has like really equated to that. I'm hot. My blood's broiling. I'm more excited. I'm having more fun, and my body's way more ready for, you know, the stimulus it's about to go through. And so, you know,
Yeah.
that theory of play just cracked me up because I'm like, somehow this guy's only got 3,000 followers, but you know, he's tapping on things that not too many coaches are really talking about. Again, it sounds like you didn't accidentally stumble into that. Like what led you to more play?
No, and I'll give you a quick example. I don't know if you've seen Brooke Downs. She's a U.S. coastal rower. We lock up hands like this. I'm not going to wrestle her necessarily. That might be a little ridiculous.
Yeah.
But we lock hands, and she's got to like fight with me. She's got to move my body. So I'll just kind of be stationary. She's like, I swear to God, I'm going to move you, man. And it's a beautiful thing. It's that human touch is everything. It's everything. Man, it started because I got into coaching at 16 years old. I had to sit out a season, and then I had an opportunity to play a little bit of college ball, but I got too many concussions, and so it became more so coaching for me. And it's always come from a play state. Before I even knew what strongman lifts were, or Jefferson curls, or like all these other weird I just started doing them because I found it fascinating. And it was always like, well, why the fuck do I have to do it that way? Like, if I can squat, I can squat this way. I can squat that way. And I'm not the best. You know, Lucas Hardy with like range of strength, right? On his, he's brilliant with that stuff.
Yeah.
And there's quite a few more, like DJ Murakami with strong camps, and obviously some fascinating characters out there that can really move exceptionally well. But I think all of it came from a space of curiosity, you know, and the artistry of it all. Philosophy, art, the creativity, curiosity side of it more so than the science. And then what's beautiful about all of this curiosity is you go read the science, you're like, yep, it made sense to kind of go this route. the intuition took me there. Now I've learned a little bit more. Now, like, get the hell out of that rabbit hole, go play again. But my PhD is in human performance sport pedagogy, man. It's the art, science, philosophy of teaching. I didn't want to be an exercise scientist necessarily. That's fun to learn. I think it's great to dive into all the methods and every research paper you can get your hands on at some point. Filtering what's good and what's not is very helpful. But yeah, man, it's always come from a place of, what is physical education? I've always been fascinated by kids as far as like how they move. My nieces and nephews, they teach me a lot. My niece making fun of me for not being able to do a cartwheel well, like that's the good stuff. And animals. That's why I call my stuff jungle cat stuff. It's like, I'm always fascinated by how animals move. They have a lot to teach us in some ways, though we're not, we're bipedal, but there's something to that flow, especially with like cats and all that. It's like that flow and that ability to really move and then explode and then just kind of settle in, steady. Dealing with a client right now, he just wants to be hard all the time. And it's like, hey, the hardest thing I've ever done is learn to sit with my thoughts, and then being able to take that and go.
Yeah. You kind of remind me. So the strength coach that's coaching me now is kind of like a mentor of mine too. And he's always kind of, every conversation that we've had, he's kind of pushed being a mutt. You just got to be a mutt. Like, there's a lot of really good Poliquin stuff. There's a lot of really good, mobility stuff from Lucas, and there's a lot of good Ido Portal stuff. And you just keep going. And, if you just follow down one path and, like just get blinded to a dogma, then, you can still be very good, but you end up having holes and you miss things. And so it's just so interesting to, again, regress and try to like take a lot of things from everywhere. Let that be a cat and how nimble they are, but they don't have to warm up to be very quick and explosive.
Right.
And it's gorgeous to watch that. And like, I've seen one other sprinting coach, and I forgot his name, but he's like, his whole quote is like, feed the cat. He likes to just train speed.
Tony Holler.
And it's just a very interesting concept that I never had. I instantaneously started learning about Poliquin, and Ben Patrick was a big intro for me to, strength training because of the issues that I had. But do you feel like you've kind of been a mutt now that you've gone down such a deep path of education, from the studies and stuff like that? But it seems like you've kind of touched everywhere with a lot of different backgrounds and experiences.
Yeah, I was fortunate in a sense that, I had the right mentors, I think, to discourage me maybe from hopping into like, every kid's goal in the kinesiology department. I'm going to work for a college team, work for a pro team. It's like, yeah, have you been able to teach kindergartners? The diva elite athlete isn't much different, right? Joel Smith wrote Speed Strength, Just Fly Performance. He kind of talks about that. It's like, yeah, all these high performance coaches, that's cool. You can coach the elite athletes, but what about like a group of kindergartners, right? Yeah, man, I've been fortunate in that I didn't have to get stuck in one method. I think that with what's obvious with the college and pro, with you wearing that fancy polo on, with the nice logo on your shirt, it's not their fault, man. Like, they got to prove themselves through data. Right? Which I find fascinating. But they have to prove themselves through data to somebody who doesn't really understand the data anyway, a lot of times. And I find that to be unfortunate for them because, they're going to have to get locked into specific ways. And I think the beauty of the college strength game in a lot of ways is that it is more simple. It's more simplified. And they're waiving loads and all that, and you're dealing with velocity-based training, all that stuff. That's fantastic. But it's probably really difficult for them to find themselves in an explorative place. Not all of them. I think Zach Deshaun at TCU does a wonderful job with the movement over maxes stuff, right? He finds different crawling patterns and introduces it to his baseball players and so on. But yeah, man, I've never gotten locked in. And the longer I'm in the game, the less convicted I am. I find it fat. You named a couple coaches. They stand with strong convictions about their methods.
Yeah.
That's remarkable to me. I wish I could be that way. I have no idea how they got there, especially when they do it for like decades. You're like, wait, they stayed there. How'd that happen?
Yeah.
I think that might be lucky. Yeah.
It is interesting though, because for example, if you were to look at my career when I first got into college athletics, I instantaneously already had patellar tendonitis. And so I think the interesting part about that for me is I didn't get taken out, but I just had to modify like crazy. And I got to see strength coaches either work with rigidity or fluidity of, okay, let's work through this problem and let's step back and see what we can add, or shut down, just keep going the path. This should fit, like fix it. Go down to to the training room and just put ice on after. And you're just like, it didn't work. Hey, it didn't work. It didn't work for years. And so I think the interesting part, and it sounds like you and I kind of have a similar background in the aspect of injury forces you to be curious. Curiosity forces you to look in many different places. And by being curious and not being rigid, you actually end up learning a lot more. And I think there's a beauty to being able to connect with a lot of people and, apply it to yourself and others. And I think that for my journey has been so incredible. Now that I'm starting to come into the coaching side, and, I'm becoming more of a coach, but it's like, I think the funny part for me is you've been in the industry for a very long time. I'm just now stepping in, and it's like the more I learn, the less I feel like I know. And then it's kind of funny to see the people that are very rigid actually surprises me, kind of like you. I'm like, how are you not changing? Like, how are you not being like so blown away by the things people are doing and applying? Let that be the old strength, like new mobility ideas. I've just been so interested in, all of these different training methodologies and ideas behind them. And I think that's why I was instantaneously kind of very curious about yours, because you almost started to remind me of me. And I was like, whoa, like this guy's doing what I want to do. And like, you're not just working strength, but you're working mobility. You're working like plyometrics in a playful way. How did you get to this jungle cat programming, and how have you been able to kind of curate this program that fits all of these aspects into it?
I'm from Mobile, Alabama, man. We have like the most NFL athletes per capita of any city, right? And maybe it's like Deerfield, Florida now. You're surrounded by monsters. Guess what they didn't have? Good strength training. Hardly any kind of facilities whatsoever.
Yeah.
Hardly any good food. Right? We saw Tyreek Hill walk in the stadium with McDonald's in his hands, right? Ashton, my cyclist, you might see me post on Instagram all the time. Dude, he downs a Honey Nut Cheerios like every day, all day, rides like crazy, Man, you grow up pretty tough. You grow up pretty tough there. And the other side is you're around exceptional athletes. In those medium-sized cities, I'm sure you've read The Best, How Elite Athletes Are Made. These medium-sized cities, man, they like breed this competition. And it was just being able to observe and take a step back and go, man, like, I don't have all the answers. The way this kid moves is exceptional, but the way this kid moves is exceptional too. And it's not the fastest kid in the 40. It's not the strongest kid in the weight room. It's the one that has these unknown qualities, man. Like, they call it intangibles. It's like, man, where did that come from? And And really, out of all those experiences was, I grew up in a multicultural place, and I know how to talk to a lot of different types of people, and they all have something beautiful to offer. And so it's just kind of getting in tune with them, and finding that little bit that you may be able to push just a little bit more. But it's those conversations of body, of mind, of soul.
Mm.
I think that's sort of where it came from. Is just connecting with all different types of people, and they taught me more than I could ever teach anybody, man. Just watching that kind of freakish athleticism all the time in every sport.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered the question or not.
Yeah, it touches upon like the idea behind it. So when you're in more of a rigid situation though, how do you end up programming for larger groups, since it seems like you like to, give a lot of freedom to the people you're programming for and make it fun and different?
Yeah, man, I've got some cyclists right now in particular. They're all getting something that's very similar. But we're also connecting on the phone and through voice text stuff. Like, thank God for like voice text now, where somebody can really get a long-winded message out, think through it, and we can respond in due time. But it depends on how curious they are, how they came into this thing. There are some people that just need general physical preparation in a very simplified way. Though I have taken GPP to mean more so focusing on hips, ribs, spine, and shoulders. Mm. So most people aren't moving very well in their ribs. People's ribs are jacked, like at all ages. They don't really move very well. And so their spine's kind of stuck. They all got low back pain, right? They all have like a shoulder problem. Everybody almost presents like the same issues, especially if they haven't been curious movers. And so GPP for them now looks more so like an exploratory phase, whereas GPP for the explorers kind of looks more like a performance-backed scientific rigorous phase, because they know what to do. It's like, hey man, in your warm-up, play. What is that? I want you to set an 8-minute timer and jump as many ways as you possibly can. I find that to be far more effective than plyometric training.
Yeah.
For most people, I'm not training high jumpers or, any long jumpers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then it's because I was listening to another coach that I've been very interested in. I would love to have on too, Will Rattel.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Super
absolute monster.
And he was kind of going over the concept of periodization being kind of shit. Again,
yeah, he's called it out in a lot of ways. It's been really cool.
Yeah,
to see that.
And again, it's like it's exciting for me, right? Because I'm so new to this field. So hearing ideas that I'm understanding and building upon, kind of getting thrown out the door. Because again, my mentor was like, once you pass the CSCS, go ahead and throw away that book. And I was like,
yeah, 100%. 100%.
I'm like, okay. And it's
nobody cares about sarcoplasmic reticulum. It's like I've been around a couple coaches that call them pedantic. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, you're really talking about things on the deep cellular level to your clients,
Yeah. So it's interesting to hear things like that, and it sounds like you kind of tap upon that as depending on the athlete, periodization does make sense. And when we have to be structured, let's be structured. But when the opportunity presents itself, we should step away from that. And, maybe you're focusing on more of like an accumulation phase of let's get GPP, let's get volume in, and let's make sure that, you have the ability and the stamina to do what you need.
Yeah, I find it very rare. In fact, I cannot look at my past, even with exceptional athletes like University of Alabama running backs, these SEALs, whatever I've trained. It's really hard to point to a time where I needed to be that structured with them and to be that concerned about an interference effect to influence their power, their strength, their hypertrophy, all these things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much that goes into that, whether it's their nutrition, their recovery. It's a story for another time. But yeah, man, I mean, again, like I love periodization. I particularly dove deep into like Soviet style periodization. I really like the undulating and waving of volumes just because we're concerned with plateaus, and then diving deep into triphasic with Cal Dietz, conjugate method, French contrast. And then Will kind of has been talking about is like, how about we just lift and we jump and we do some other dope shit too when it's time to do some dope shit. Or you look at Blaine McConnell, right? His buddy, where they've combined on their efforts is like, keep it simple. And then with a guy like me or Austin Josham, right? It's like, all right, time to play. Go nuts. Be an absolute fucking weirdo. And if you're concerned about being a weirdo in the weight room, then everybody's concerned about what they look. Don't worry. You've got to do strange stuff to untap, find it. There's something inside of you, man.
Yeah.
You don't know. And it's probably going to come out of crawling, rolling, jumping over some shit, maybe breaking your body down a little bit and then rising back up through super compensation, right? It's like, dive in, get fucked up, come back out. You're fine.
Yeah.
It's like, even with the Zerchers, like, won't that hurt my elbows? It's like, yeah, it will at first. And then you're going to be like so damn tough.
Yeah.
And you're going to have this skill set. About my father that had a stroke. Like, I am Zerchering him right now, lifting him up into my truck. What a skill set.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is dope. I'm doing Scott lifts, like strongman style lifts. It's all there, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I find it to be like amazing. We still try to use speed ladders for agility. It's like Barry Sanders, man. He can get that way by hopping around on a speed ladder,
Yeah. I feel like it's interconnecting with like gymnastics. Like you're reminding me that in the aspect of when I was a kid, my mom put me in gymnastics, and they open up some rules for you to do things, but the majority of it is play and just like you're just learning and experiencing through movement. And it's you gain the skill acquisition by doing, and then they give you the few parameters to play with, and then you learn from there. And so
right. Well, it's like I talked about. It's, you can talk about the pedagogy of it, but it's a constraints-led approach, right? US Ski and Snowboard just hired Tyler Yearby with Emergent Movement, and that's his whole like PhD, is really on the constraints-led approach. Just tweaking the task, the environment, understanding the individual can't really change unless they have to adapt, to a stimulus that's out in front of them and changing the situation. Or it's called nonlinear pedagogy. I heard your podcast with the psychologist. He's talking about like progress isn't linear.
Yeah.
And we know like through some research, like a 1 rep max can change 18% plus minus on a given day. That can be a 36% essentially difference.
Yeah.
So your 10 out of 10 effort should always be there. 100%. Like you should always be in as best as you can muster that day. But it may shift.
Yeah.
So with my father with this stroke, it's like, well, why are we starting at step 1? That's where his therapist started. We can go to step 7. And then we may have to bring it back.
Yep.
Look at University of Alabama training for a national championship right now. They went back to fundamentals for a week of practice, and then they'll get complex again. And that's where I had to go back to whenever I started kind of struggling about 4 months ago. It was like, wait a second. Slow it down. What do I want my elbows to do? What can they do? What should a shoulder be able to do? What can every single joint, tendon, ligament do? Stop thinking about power, strength, speed. Steady yourself. And I think what ends up happening with a lot of coaches over time is they move from, in sport pedagogy, it's called like disciplinary mastery on one side, which is practice and command, general in front of the troops. Follow my directions. to ecologically integrated, you're creating like the whole human being, man. I'm not sure what you're going to be talking about with them, but there's a socio-cultural element to all of this. You're bringing in all sorts of different stuff. You're laterally thinking your way, and it's all in the gray. So you go away from that black and white thinking and into this whole different realm. And I call it the soul. And I know that sounds woo-woo, but I don't give a shit. Like, there's something in us, man, that you cannot explain. And I find it all the time with serious athletes.
Yeah. So then can you walk us through your PhD then and the ideas that you're building on behind it and what that looks like?
I got a little pigeonholed with mine. I wasn't, it's not exactly what I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to be able to kind of explore more high performance in this realm. It ended up being more K through 12 physical education, which ended up, over time, I started to understand how these things could fit. With the K through 12, PE meets performance, aka play meets performance. And I found what rubbed me the wrong way in physical education was, well, I want the kid to be able to set up, throw, and hit the target 8 out of 10 times. You're like, or you build an obstacle course and you put a ball in the kid's hand, ask him to throw it like 8 times, probably going to hit the target a hell of a lot better than he is standing across from somebody. And so what it really allowed me to do was teach and observe and see very different styles of what teaching looks like in a physical education context. And now I can watch coaches. And I watched one today. He's an NBA trainer, basketball coach. He's got 8-year-olds. He's yelling at them to do 7 different things with the basketball. It takes him, I believe, 3.5 minutes to get these instructions out. And he goes, "Is that clear?" And you're going, they're 8. They're not brave enough to go, "I don't know what the fuck you just said. I have no idea what just happened, but we're going to try." You know? And so a lot of it for me became like, all right, look at physical educators. Same thing with coaching education, right? It's all the same. It just takes a little bit of lateral thinking to go that direction. And so a lot of our work was with occupational socialization. So like, what is your acculturation phase? As you grow up, what are you learning? Who are you learning from? Professional socialization, your university phase, right? Like they find that to be the most useless. Mm-hmm. And then you get into really your profession. And that's where it really hits. Mm-hmm. That's where people start to truly change. Are they going to change the game? Strategically, like redefine the entire game? Are they going to sit on the fence, or are they going to comply? A lot of people in Alabama, they're football coaches, they're going to comply. They're going to stick with it. These old school methods, they've always worked. They've done work for me. I swear to God, I'm going to stick by them. Then you have people that are not sure. A lot of these people burn out anyway. And then you have people that go a totally different direction. And they change the damn game. And you've talked about a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you say we're missing from, we'll start at the bottom, from our like K through 12 kids? What would you add specifically to benefit them to where we could make sure that their integration into, like professional or, most of their sports is more high performance?
I don't necessarily think that schools should always be responsible for a kid's athletic development. We're not very well funded. I think a lot of pressure, or it's quite obvious that people have the wrong idea about what a physical educator does. The very good ones. But if you have 100 kids in a classroom, what are you teaching? It's unfair. Yeah. So a lot of teachers are at a severe disadvantage just due to resources. And I can't change that. Yeah. That's federally funded or state funded stuff. You can look at Spark, John Ratey's work, and he takes a vignette, which is Naperville, Illinois, and they get a ton of cardiovascular work. It's a movement-based school, more so than anything. And I have a friend at the University of Memphis that is blending philosophy, and he takes some of my thoughts with movement, and he's working with the university school at the University of Memphis to sort of develop character with movement, and that sort of taking precedent over a lot of other things, you know. And so how do we develop like the whole human being with movement in mind first? I mean, biggest thing is we put kids in desks for 7 hours a day, and what the hell are we doing?
Yeah.
And we call them ADHD and we medicate them, and you and I come from Prozac Nation generation where it's like, give them an Adderall and a Ritalin. It's like, well, did you move them today? Did they have more than 15 minutes of recess?
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, that's a lot of it is like, we don't necessarily need to do a performance-based K through 12, you know, thing. Are they playing, and do they fall in love with play?
Yeah.
You know, do they fall in love with skill acquisition? And are our physical education teachers equipped with the resources, the knowledge, and their own experience with their body? That's always going to be the issue I have, is like, you got to move your body to explore with the kids. Are you playing or not? So it's a really tough game, man. I think I hate to say the cop out is like, it's contextual always with these answers, but you've got to come from a place of skill acquisition with these kids and exposure to a lot of different things. And one of the best models I've seen is called games invention. So you may teach them like traditional sport, and usually this is going to happen with a smaller group. You teach them traditional sports, and then you go, okay, we've got a couple different types of goals. You have a few different options with balls. All right, you can create any kind of boundary you want, and you have about 10 minutes to come up with a game. And after those kids have understand rules, you know, and how to regulate themselves a little bit, that's when it really starts to take off, and you see that creativity flourish.
Yeah.
And they'll even change point systems on the fly with like a kid who's struggling. Be like, when he scores, that's 6 points. The coach doesn't have to say anything. And you probably did this as a kid. Like, well, the next shot counts as 7 points. It's like, all right. You know, so they'll change these rules on the fly. Whenever you give the game to the kids, man, it connects usually.
Yeah.
It takes time.
Yeah. Then take it out of the school system. I always find this kind of interesting. Some parents do it, some don't. But for like me, for example, I did gymnastics, and then I was put into a couple of other sports. And then once I made the decision of like, okay, you know, tiny for baseball, that doesn't work. And just didn't like soccer. Definitely had the best kind of like flow when it comes to gymnastics, and I was the most gravitated towards that. But I had
obviously,
yeah, but I had to, you know, utilize doing the other sports to know that. And I think you had a video talking about, hey, like specification at an early age doesn't make that much sense, and it's not necessarily going to make you better. Do you want to kind of go over that concept that you kind of talked about? Because I think it was super interesting. I feel like a lot of people get that kind of wrong.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking they still get it wrong because it's all over the place now.
Yeah.
Like the information is there. What I will say is, if I ran a physical education classroom, you know, so let's put it back there for a second.
Sure.
Gymnastics would be the first thing we would do. And it needs to exist all the time.
Yeah.
It needs to exist in play. Some type of parkour, obstacle courses, whatever. If it were up to me, kids would be wrestling.
Yeah.
I collegiately wrestled in elementary school. That was a big part of what we did. And you talked about, what's your favorite warm-up? Wrestling.
Yeah.
You know, it's that ability to negotiate a body in space and know how to use leverage, right? I mean, so any type of martial art that would be critical to a child's development, and it's pretty clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's kind of stunning. I mean, Steve Magnus just put that out there yesterday. He's already written about it in plenty of his works, but it's obvious that when we specialize, the biggest thing I worry about, and you know people like this, is they burn out.
Yeah.
We burn these kids out and they lose love for their sport. What is that about? No offense to people that take on clients, I get it. It's soccer, basketball, like one-on-one. Damn it. It's like, okay, you're setting out some cones and that's adorable, but like, man, or 3v3 game where you step the hell away and just let the kids play.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that's where the development really happens. It's, you know, it's not hard to look at, you know, where does a third of the French national team come from with soccer? The Parisian streets. No one was teaching them. Brazil was the most creative in soccer. They played futsal in very tiny rooms. You know, that's where their footwork was developed. But they also got out on the beach and played volleyball. And they also practiced capoeira. And they have a brilliant movement culture there. And they dance, right? I find the best athletes that I've ever worked with, the most graceful yet powerful, have a huge dance culture in their background. And they're not afraid to express that dance. And probably my biggest regret as a coach, when I had all of these African refugees on my team, that should have been a huge part of our warm-up, because I had inner city Black youth and I had African refugees, and they all had a different way of moving, and that should have been our warm-up. And I promise you it would have freaked out all the white folks anyway. But like, to allow that expression and to get that back into the game, I missed out. They missed out because I didn't see it soon enough. You know?
Yeah.
So it's got to be that too.
Yeah.
I think dance is critical, and it's something I wish I'd done. I wish somebody taught me ballet and hip hop at an early age.
Yeah. I feel like that's something Ido Portal would kind of touch upon. You would see a lot of his movement. Even now, I feel like he keeps drifting towards that of being able to move fluidly, and you see a lot of his work is with like touching you and being able to react with how he touches. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
Not to say that like watching it for quite a bit, I didn't really understand what was going on, and I did kind of take that in.
Ido would be like, it's not in the understanding.
No, yeah, and it's like I think that's kind of funny, especially with some of the answers that you give, though, because they fall upon that same pattern of like when he did his interview with Andrew Huberman, for example. I was like, one, he didn't answer a question directly a single
Never
time.
done.
Yeah, and I was like, I left that whole podcast being more confused, and I felt like I kind of I understood some of his training, but felt almost like more confused. And I think almost that could be his point, is he keeps pushing like the exploration, because I feel like if you watched old Ido Portal, like he was doing a lot of like Olympic lifting and gymnastics work, but he has changed to so much more movement based, like dancing. I feel like a lot of his posts have been like that, and trying to like teach your body like the loose relaxedness to flick and move. And so it's just been a very interesting journey watching him kind of figure these things out. He's such a good learner, I feel like.
Yeah, he's a fascinating character. He's obviously hard to follow and very expensive to learn from.
Yeah.
More power to him. Good for him, man.
Yeah.
I think, for me, the big shift in my life in just the last few months has been the somatic therapy, and like truly understanding how my body connects to everything around me, and again, woo woo, but it's like, I'm learning that my nervous system extends beyond these fingertips and these toes, right? That that energy extends out in the world, and how my energy is in here internally affects that outside world. It affects you, it affects me. It affects the way I hit the ground, right?
Yeah.
Where I need to be supple, where I need to be tense. And it's like really getting in tune. And like, how do you teach that to somebody? It can be taught. When are they ready? Is another question. And that's tough. I think that's really tough. I've been through a tremendous amount of tragedy in my life. So I'm more open probably at this point at 37 years old to like really diving into different layers that maybe some people, it's not their fault, their ego, they're like held on so tightly to what they think is cool, what is necessary, what's going to make them more aesthetically pleasing, right, to the eye.
Yeah.
The more hair I lose, right, it seems like the better person I become. Right? It's like the uglier you get, you kind of stop worrying about that stuff a little bit. And like, it's like, all right, man, like, I think that's going to be my next adventure with how I train athletes and my clients is like, how do we start to build that capacity to truly understand the meaning behind it, your meaning and your purpose. Because, I just recently talked, it's like, it's not about motivation and discipline, for fuck's sakes.
Yeah.
Like, it drives me nuts, dude. What are y'all talking about? Wake up in the morning and do it this way. It's like, mother, you're so fortunate to be able to do that. It's about like, what is your purpose?
Yeah.
For my inner city kids, like, I get the fuck out of here. I gotta leave. It's time to go. I wake up driven to get out of here.
Yeah.
For me, it's, I've got to be a damn good man. I want to be a damn good teacher. So I got a lot to learn. I have a lot to explore, and I better not stand convicted because I'm going to lose people, and I better not be cruel, and I better not participate in call out culture and criticizing other people anymore because it serves no purpose.
Yeah. So if you, sorry, I was just going to kind of walk it to then connecting those pieces with your individual clients. Let's just say it's more general population. And I think this piece is interesting because, a lot of people are trying to figure out their way into a movement practice, let that be strength training. How do you ease people into that in a more conducive way to where
I don't
just throw it all at them?
You'd be surprised at how much people are willing to be a weirdo. Now, obviously, I think it's about your immediate charisma and connection. I get that. One of the biggest questions, like I have a professor buddy at Delphi. It's like, how do you teach somebody to be cool? Like to their students. So if you know how to connect, like you can get somebody to do something pretty weird for them, for their body, pretty quickly.
Yeah.
A 66-year-old engineer, like, hey, would you be willing to crawl? Yeah, I think so. I'm like, all right, crawl. Well, how do you want me to crawl? Just start crawling and then we'll dive into different patterns. I just want to see what you come up with. I talked about it in like this weird interview that happened in Santa Barbara. It was like, I had an 80-something-year-old lady. I was like, do you want to jump rope? She's like, I don't think I can. I was like, well, let's try to jump rope. She jumped rope. She started crying. It's like, that was weird for her. She was like, I feel like I'm 8 years old again. It's like, yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah.
And that was probably one of my favorite moments. But yeah, I think it's like, you have to immediately ask if they're okay with it. And I think they almost always are. They came to you for a reason. They wanted some guidance.
Yeah.
And if you really have that belief in you that this is going to support them and you can back it up with a little bit of knowledge, but a lot of exploration, you're going to evolve a human being really quickly.
Yeah.
It's like, for me, it's like, let's explore, let's expand that skill set, and let's watch you evolve. And you'll be this empowered individual through that. And then we just kind of run that cycle over and over again, where there isn't too long where you're going to plateau. Like you just keep becoming obsessed with skill acquisition.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting, and you've brought up how, students sit in desks all day and the body becomes tight and rigid. Um, we primarily see that with, older populations. And I feel like, you just brought up really two fantastic examples of a 66-year-old and then someone in their 80s. It's interesting to see these other cultures. I get lucky enough to travel all over the world, and you see a lot of these cultures, such as my favorite, Japan. A lot of these older individuals are moving constantly. And this is one situation blew me away. I was actually in China for this. I'm in their workout room, and you can tell it's an older couple in their 70s or 80s, going to the workout room, and there's a personal trainer there, like running them through a program, pushing the older gentleman through, like a stretching routine, but they always make sure to move, even in groups too. And there is that soul part of it, to where, they wake up, there's 10 to 15 of them, and they do just, a basic routine to make sure that there's some form of movement to stay mobile. And then you also see that lack of rigidity when they all can get into like a perfect little primal squat, and none of us can here. And it's just it's so important that I see that. I've been understanding it, and then now putting it out there for older individuals. Well, I shouldn't be lifting weights, and you have to like reframe their mind to go, no, like your body will adapt depending on the stimulus that you give it. So if you're sitting on a couch, your body will adapt to that. And when you go and try to do hard things, like, you'll probably crumble. And so do you feel like when you are training these older individuals, it's almost the first step you have to do is kind of break past the mental barrier of you can be a kid again. You can, work back to these strong feelings that you once had, but you have to get past that one first barrier.
Yeah, man. Like that's the first conversation you're really having, and that's the I think that's the constant for me in my coaching with them. And I love it. The 50s and 60s, 70-year-olds, work with people with Parkinson's and MS and all points in between. And yeah, man, it's like, hey, what did you love to do? There's a great paper out of Australia. I'll send it to you whenever I get a chance. It's about meaning making through movement. And they're asking these middle schoolers to like be very descriptive with their language about what they feel in their favorite movement experience. So like the waves and the way they touch their fingertips and the salt on their lips as they're surfing, things like that, right? And so it's trying to get them to recall that. Like, what did you do as a kid? Okay, they love that. All right, what can I do in this setting to somewhat mimic that and let them feel that? I'm not sure what that's going to be. Like, that can be always contextual. I had a man that was in a wheelchair. We shot medicine balls through my arms. He loved that. He was 88 years old. Boom. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, tapping into that early success or whatever they loved, and then bringing that into their life now. A lot of people love being in their garden. That's an awkward position.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you're like, hey, let's visit some strongman stuff. I don't know if I can do that. I have like this 55-year-old. She's picking up these crazy like Jefferson style lifts, like these one-arm lifts. She's a savage, dude. Absolute savage. She had no idea she was this strong.
Yeah.
So she came in with this skill set, and it was just in the observations, like, well, she gardens all the time. She works like 3 hours a day in this garden. I'll bet she's got some weird patterns in her, right? So I think that's where it's like, you do need to be a veteran as a coach a little bit to tap into that.
Yeah.
I'm not encouraging all young coaches to like get weird right away. I think you need to be smart.
Yeah. Try the Zercher.
Yeah. Scary, super scary. But try like the old school strongman zercher where you're pulling it from the floor, setting it on your knees, and then going.
Yeah.
And like I did that with a recent guy that's 66. He's like, oh my God. And he did it, you know? He had no idea he could do it, but he pulled it off.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's always asking questions, man.
Mm. Yeah.
You know, whether it's these verbal, like, you know, call and response, like asking them a question they can verbally answer, or asking questions of the body.
Mm.
And, you know, progressive overload, just don't be a doofus.
Yeah.
You know, it's like load 65, not 165.
Yeah. Why do you think we've lost? And I feel like it's kind of reemerging now, unless I haven't seen it. But why have a lot of the old strongman lifts kind of reemerged back into the training space? Because I feel like they've kind of disappeared for a little bit, unless they've just been under the radar.
Social media is a hell of a drug.
Valid. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, it's sexy.
Yeah.
It's sexy. You know, you see Atlas Power Shrugged pulling off some nutty stuff, right? You know, I mean, there's just so many wild lifts, like the hack lifter, my friend Tasha Louie, like, oh my God, the stuff that woman can do. It's nuts, man. It's absolutely nuts, the strength that you can pull off. And once you discover, like, wait, that's not just weird, that's really dope, and that's performance.
Yeah.
A hack lift and a zercher squat feel a hell of a lot more like knocking the living shit out of somebody in sport than a back squat.
Yeah.
So you feel that intensity, and you got to be locked in. And there's two different types of techniques with that. Yeah, I think it's just social media drugs, man.
Yeah.
You know, it's getting that dopamine hit, seeing that dope lift, and wondering if you can.
Yeah. I guess the reason why I was kind of blown away, specifically more so for like the zercher, for example. When we're looking, I'll just go back to the CSCS. Like a question that you'll get is, you know, something for an offensive lineman. He should be doing, like, what are our tests here? Like, he should do a 1 rep max bench press and a 15-yard dash. But like, if you're thinking about it, that zercher would kind of make sense. Like the amount of stress and the amount of force to be able to hold that properly. Like, I feel like the applications could be so, like, fundamental for jujitsu, wrestling, football.
There's a reason why it's making its way into martial arts.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the first place I saw people doing it.
Okay.
More so for performance was in the MMA space. They caught on to that a decade ago.
Yeah.
It's been going on a long time in that space. You'll see, I think a lot of like evolution with training, it's kind of come out of martial arts. It's also because of the popularity of jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai. It's like obviously taken off.
Yeah.
And I think particularly with like men, they want to be men and they're stoics and they gravitate to that. But with jiu-jitsu, you know, it's always a skill acquisition. So they're more willing to kind of shift their way of training. And I think that probably, you know, bleeds out into broader movement and physical culture.
Yeah.
And then leaves physical culture and starts to make its way into performance. You know, there's a few coaches out there really doing that stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot that don't touch it. There's some godfathers out there I won't name that are never going to touch that stuff. They're scared to death.
Yeah. The other piece that I found quite interesting was also like the emergence of like mobility training. Lucas, for example.
Yeah.
And I think it's beautiful for me to recognize it, right? Because diving is, how fast can you compress? And the deeper I've gotten into, you know, the training side of diving, I've tried to like relay this to some other strength coaches and to express, like, there's a little Chinese boy that can do everything I can on platform. So the threshold for strength is not that high. It's not. And so, you know, maybe, sure, I'm going to out jump them, but how fast they compress into a flip completely mediates that difference between the two of us. And so when, we're now looking at mobility training, it gets very interesting for me because, you're trying to compare it to the old gymnastics that I went through with a Russian coach, which is you're going to sit in this front split for 2 minutes and I'm going to sit on top of you. And we're going to rip you into this new range.
Yeah.
And we did that for example, my groin, I can like PNF my way down into a complete flat standing middle split. But the problem is I have no dynamic utilization of that. Like I can't just access that range because there's deep trauma there. Like when I'm 4 feet above the ground and he takes my legs to tap onto the ground from like a backwards pancake, like I didn't recover from that even till now. And so seeing Lucas and a lot of these other, mobility practitioners going, hey, if we can do this in a smart way of accessing the strength through the length, it takes longer. That's the frustrating part. It definitely takes longer in my mind versus.
Yeah. I think to a degree, it sort of depends on how it's loaded and like how flexible do you need to be. It's Fernando Tatis can hit a split in the middle of the air while playing shortstop. Not all shortstops need that though.
Yeah.
How flexible do you need to be? Your sport, obviously you do.
Yeah.
Lucas, what he does really well in a lot of these cats is like, hey, your hip flexors aren't tight. They're weak.
Yeah.
And most men are sitting around with exceptionally weak hip flexors, adductors, abductors, and a lot of them may be like doing things like box squats or whatever. And then, they're stressing the hell out of adductor magnus coming out of that box. Right. Yeah. And they're wondering why they keep getting hurt because they don't even access the range. I've got an athlete. She's the real deal. She was partially squatting forever. Mm-hmm. She's a rower.
Yeah.
What do?
Yeah.
They compress.
Yeah.
And her coaches were like, nope, you're too tall. It's like, yeah, levers matter, but it doesn't mean she doesn't have the ability to get there. And she better be able to use that deep flexion to get that extension.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, with Lucas, it's been wonderful to see loaded mobility, come into the game because it encourages more people to access deeper ranges of motion.
Yeah.
And as you're understanding, mobility equals strength. There's not a separation there. Yeah. It's just access to range of motion. Can you produce force out of that? The game is force. Yeah. Almost always. With Lucas, it's more so like I need to move well and I want to be fluid. Mm-hmm. And he plays some of that force game too.
Yeah.
And a lot of these other practitioners too. I just love him.
Yeah.
Like he's a buddy. Yeah. So I'll talk him up. He needs 700,000 followers.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of his work, and it's kind of it's morphed and changed how I've seen a lot of my mobility training because I used to just do the old gymnastic stuff, just sit in these positions until I get into the range that I want and hope that it stays there and do that every single day. And I never looked at it like progressive overload, and I never looked at a lot of these things as strength training, but it's just that end range that we're working on.
Yeah, he's hitting you with sets and reps, and these the other side of that is like ISO holds. Yeah. The benefit of an ISO hold in a really challenging position, not just physical capacity, like it changes your structure.
Yeah.
It's healing you.
Yeah.
It's also healing you here. In a sense, it's like, can you dig deep?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you go a little bit further? Like you can.
Yeah.
Hold a wall squat on one leg with 300 something pounds that you're holding up on. Like, dude, you go to dark places.
Yeah.
You find out a lot about yourself, and that stuff's really beautiful too. Yeah. I love that we've gotten back to isometrics as an amazing strength training tool.
Yeah.
And it's accessible. Like people are on the road. I hit that 2-minute golden window, and you've got the ability to have a hell of a training session and maintain strength mobility And there is some interesting work that it might train fast twitch fibers.
Mm.
So you may be able to keep that speed because it's just doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's been an absolute honor chatting with you, and this
Yeah,
has
man.
been super fun. I'll definitely have to rip you back on the podcast at some point and just re-go over new little things that I've been running into and learning. But
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed your time, and I appreciate you popping on with me today.
I appreciate it, man. It's been an absolute honor. Hopefully I did you justice here.
Of course. Yeah, it was an absolute fun conversation. And these are the ones that I look for to kind of just challenge the way we look at things, challenge the way I look at things, and just constantly learn. I think that's the goal. Once you stop doing that, you stagnate, and it's just, I'm not trying to do that.
Yeah, never.
Yeah.
All right,
All
brother.
right. Thank you for your time. Have a good one.